"Your curves make me crazy," Virgin Amish man whispered to the fat widow. A quiet Amish man, pure as fresh fallen snow, takes in a stranded widow on a freezing Kansas night. The town calls her shameful. The church calls her dangerous. But when the lamplight flickers and she kneads bread with trembling hands, his heart betrays his vows. "Your curves make me crazy," he whispers, and the words echo through the valley like a sin set free. What begins as mercy soon turns into scandal, a forged land deed, a burning cabin, a secret that could destroy them both. And as the whole town points their fingers, will a man who's never touched a woman break every rule of his faith to protect the one woman who taught him what love truly means? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The winter wind howled like a wounded beast as Nora Brenner urged her exhausted mule forward through knee-deep snow. Her frozen fingers clutched the reins, and her teeth chattered beneath the thin wool scarf wrapped around her face. The wagon creaked behind her, loaded with the only possessions she'd managed to save from the fire. Quilts her mother had sewn, a few cooking pots, and the family Bible. "Just a little further, Belle," she whispered to the mule, whose ears flicked back at the sound of her voice. "Lord, help us find shelter soon." As if in answer to her desperate prayer, a golden light flickered through the whirling snow. Nora squinted, hardly daring to believe her eyes. There, not more than 50 yards ahead, stood a simple cabin with a lamp burning in its window. Hope surged through her frozen limbs. The closer she came, the more details emerged through the white curtain of snow. Solid log walls, a neat stack of firewood under the eaves. Someone lived here, someone who kept things in good order. But would they welcome a stranger on such a bitter night? Her numb fingers could barely grip the handle to unlatch the gate. She stumbled through deep drifts to the cabin's door, leaving Belle and the wagon by the fence. Each step felt like lifting lead weights. When she finally reached the door, she had to lean against the frame to stay upright as she knocked. Inside, Ezra Stoltzfus sat at his workbench, carefully sanding the joints of a new rocking chair. The knock startled him from his methodical work. He wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at this late hour. The ordnung was clear about maintaining proper distance between unmarried men and women. Having a woman in his home, alone, would raise serious questions. But another knock came, more urgent this time. Ezra's conscience wouldn't let him ignore it. He opened the door to find a woman wrapped in a snow-covered shawl, her face pale with cold. "Please," Nora said, her voice trembling. "My farm burned down yesterday. I've been trying to reach town, but the storm—" She swayed slightly on her feet. Ezra's hesitation lasted only a moment. "Come in," he said quietly, stepping back. "The stove is warm." Nora stumbled inside, her skirts heavy with snow. The cabin's warmth hit her like a physical force, making her dizzy. Ezra guided her to a straight-backed chair near the pot-bellied stove. "I have a mule and wagon," she managed to say. "They need shelter too." "I will tend to them," Ezra replied. He pulled on his heavy coat and disappeared into the storm. Left alone, Nora looked around the cabin. Everything was neat as a pin, with simple furniture that showed expert craftsmanship. A carpenter's tools hung in perfect order on one wall. The few possessions spoke of a life dedicated to work and prayer. Ezra returned, bringing a blast of cold air with him. "Your mule is in the barn with fresh hay," he said, hanging up his coat. "The wagon is under shelter." "Thank you," Nora whispered. "I know this isn't proper, me being here, but I didn't know where else to go." Ezra moved to the stove and put the kettle on. His hands were steady, but his mind was in turmoil. The bishop would not approve of this situation. Yet how could sending her back into the killing storm be God's will? "Tell me what happened," he said, measuring tea leaves into a pot. As the kettle heated, Nora's story spilled out. The fire that had started in the night, her desperate scramble to save what she could, the debts her late husband had hidden from her, which meant she couldn't rebuild. "Everything I worked for, gone in one night," she said, pressing her hands against the warm stove. "I thought I could make it to town, but the storm came so fast." Ezra placed a steaming cup of tea in her hands. He noticed how they trembled, how her wedding ring hung loose on her work-roughened finger. Despite her size, there was a fragile dignity about her that touched his heart. The wind rattled the windows as they sat in silence, sipping tea. The storm was growing worse. Snow had already drifted halfway up the window panes. "You'll have to stay the night," Ezra said finally. "The storm is too dangerous." The words felt strange in his mouth, but he knew they were right. Nora looked up at him, relief and worry mingling in her expression. "I don't want to cause trouble for you with your people." "God's law of kindness comes before man's rules," Ezra replied softly, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "You can take my bed. I'll sleep in the chair." Fresh tears welled in Nora's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you, Mr. Stoltzfus. I'm much obliged for your Christian charity." As the night deepened and the storm raged on, they sat in comfortable silence. The lamp's gentle glow and the stove's warmth created a peaceful shelter from the howling darkness outside. Neither of them could know that this night of sanctuary would change both their lives forever. Dawn crept over the snow-laden landscape, painting everything in soft shades of pink and gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine blanket of white that stretched as far as the eye could see. Inside the cabin, Ezra stirred from his cramped position in the wooden chair, his neck stiff from the awkward night's sleep. The sound of quiet movement drew his attention. Nora stood at the small window, gazing out at the transformed world. "It looks like the good Lord wrapped everything in clean linen," she said softly. Ezra cleared his throat. "The cow will need milking," he said, reaching for his coat. "I'll help," Nora offered quickly. "I've done my share of dairy work." Together they trudged through the deep snow to the barn. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and livestock greeted them. The brown and white cow lowed softly as they approached. Without being asked, Nora fetched clean buckets while Ezra brought fresh hay. "Your barn is as tidy as your house," Nora commented, settling onto the milking stool. Her capable hands went to work, and soon the warm milk was streaming steadily into the bucket. "Cleanliness is next to godliness," Ezra replied, finding himself oddly comfortable with her presence. Back in the cabin, Nora insisted on making breakfast. "I've got to earn my keep," she said firmly, mixing cornmeal and buttermilk in a bowl. The familiar motions of her hands spoke of years of experience. "My mother taught me that honest work is the best payment for kindness." The smell of baking cornbread filled the small space, making it feel more like home than it had in years. Ezra found himself watching her sure movements around his kitchen, the way she hummed hymns under her breath as she worked. The peaceful morning was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Ezra's heart sank as he recognized Bishop Abram Lapp's buggy through the window. A neighbor must have noticed the strange wagon in his yard. "I had better step outside," he told Nora, who nodded understanding and moved deeper into the kitchen. The bishop's stern figure cut an imposing shape against the bright snow. "Brother Ezra," he said gravely, "word has reached me that you have taken in an English widow. "Ja, Bishop," Ezra replied respectfully. "The storm was fierce. I could not turn her away to freeze." The older man's brow furrowed. "Your Christian charity does you credit, but you must think of appearances. A single woman staying with an unmarried man. It will cause talk." "The roads are still deep with snow," Ezra said, his voice quiet but firm. "She can stay until they thaw enough for safe travel." Bishop Lapp's expression grew more troubled. "Remember the Ordnung, Ezra. Our ways protect us from worldly influence." He glanced at the cabin. "Do not let compassion lead you into impropriety." "I will be mindful," Ezra promised, though his heart felt heavy with the warning. That evening, as they sat down to a simple supper of soup and the morning's cornbread, Nora spoke hesitantly. "I heard what the bishop said. I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "You are no trouble," Ezra assured her, surprising himself with his certainty. Nora's hands twisted in her lap. "My Herbert, She paused, gathering courage. "He wasn't a kind man. The drink made him mean. I spent 10 years trying to live right while he—" She wiped quickly at her eyes. "I've always admired the plain folk. The way you live with such honest purpose. No pretense, no hiding behind fine things or false words." Ezra listened, his heart touched by her quiet dignity. When she finished speaking, he said simply, "God's hand guides all things. Perhaps he guided you here for a purpose." The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm. Nora threw herself into household tasks, sweeping floors worn smooth by generations of feet, mending clothes with tiny, precise stitches, and always humming those hymns that seemed to rise naturally from her soul. Each evening, Ezra found himself lingering longer at the supper table, drawn into conversation about faith, work, and the simple pleasures of a life well lived. But at night, alone in his chair while Nora slept in his bed, he wrestled with unfamiliar feelings that made his heart race and his palms sweat. He had always been content with his ordered life of work and prayer. Now, watching Nora move about his cabin as if she belonged there, he felt something awakening in his spirit that both thrilled and frightened him. These emotions seemed at odds with his duty to the Ordnung and his place in the community. In the quiet hours before sleep, Ezra prayed fervently for guidance. Outside his window, the winter wind that had brought Nora to his door now whispered softly through the bare branches, as if carrying his prayers heavenward. The days grew shorter as winter settled deeper around the cabin. Morning chores became a shared ritual between Ezra and Nora, their movements falling into an easy rhythm that required few words. The once quiet house now hummed with productive energy as they worked side by side. In the workshop adjacent to the cabin, Ezra showed Nora how to sand rough spots from newly crafted shelves. Her touch was gentle but sure, following the grain of the wood just as he'd demonstrated. "Like this?" she asked, and he nodded, pleased by her attention to detail. Outside, they mended harnesses together, Nora's skilled needlework matching the precision of Ezra's leather crafting. Her fingers, though plump, moved with surprising delicacy through the tough material. "My father was a harness maker," she explained. "He taught me the importance of strong stitching." The kitchen became their shared domain as well. Nora's expertise with a cook stove transformed simple ingredients into memorable meals, while Ezra contributed his knowledge of traditional Amish recipes passed down through generations. One crisp afternoon, winter sunlight streamed through the windows as Nora worked at the wooden table, kneading bread dough with practiced motions. Flour dusted her forearms and speckled her cheeks, catching the light, like morning frost. Her movements were rhythmic and sure, shoulders rolling as she pressed and folded the dough with strong hands. Ezra found himself pausing in the doorway, transfixed. The sight of her, so completely at home in his kitchen, her face peaceful in concentration, stirred something deep within him. She hummed softly as she worked, an old hymn he recognized from Sunday services, and the domestic harmony of the moment made his heart ache with longing. Before he could stop himself, words tumbled from his lips. "Your curves make me crazy, Nora." His face flushed crimson as soon as the words left his mouth, and he added hastily, "Lord, forgive me." The kitchen fell silent except for the crack and pop of the wood stove. Nora's hand stilled in the dough, and Ezra's heart hammered in his chest. He opened his mouth to apologize, mortified by his outburst, but then he heard it, the soft, warm sound of her laughter. She turned to face him, her eyes twinkling with understanding. "You're human, Ezra," she said gently. "That's not sin, only love misremembered." Her words held no judgment, only a tender wisdom that made his shame begin to melt away. The tension in the room dissolved like sugar in hot tea, replaced by something warmer and sweeter. Nora returned to her bread-making, but now her humming carried a lighter, almost playful note. Ezra found tasks to keep him in the kitchen, stoking the fire, straightening items on shelves that needed no straightening, anything to remain in her presence a little longer. As evening approached, they settled into their familiar routine. Nora stirred a pot of rich beef stew, while Ezra set 2 bowls on the table. Outside, snow began to fall again, tapping against the window panes like gentle fingers. The fire cast dancing shadows on the walls as they ate together. Nora hummed that same hymn from earlier, its melody weaving through the comfortable silence between them. Ezra found himself watching the way the firelight played across her features, highlighting the gentle curves of her face, the strength in her hands as she broke off pieces of fresh bread. He knew, sitting there in the warm quiet of his cabin, that these feelings could no longer be dismissed through prayer or penance. What had grown between them felt as natural as the changing seasons, as vital as spring after winter, and just as unstoppable. The snow continued its soft percussion against the windows, and in its rhythm, Ezra heard something like permission. Something sacred had taken root in his heart, sprouting through all his careful walls of propriety and duty. It was dangerous, yes. He could almost hear the bishop's stern warnings. But it felt right in a way that transcended the Ordnung's strict boundaries. Nora looked up from her bowl and caught his gaze. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, and she ducked her head slightly, cheeks coloring. That simple gesture contained such sweetness that Ezra had to remind himself to breathe. They finished their meal in companionable silence, both acutely aware of the shift that had occurred between them. The fire crackled in the hearth, the snow whispered against the glass, and in that moment, Ezra's small cabin felt like the warmest, most blessed place on earth. The first hints of thaw appeared 5 days later. Tiny droplets gathered at the tips of icicles hanging from the cabin's eaves, and patches of earth began to peek through the thinning snow. Nora and Ezra had settled into an easy routine, their days filled with shared work and quiet companionship. The sound of approaching horses broke the morning calm. Through the window, Ezra spotted Bishop Lapp's distinctive black buggy, accompanied by 2 church elders on horseback. His stomach tightened. He knew this visit would not be pleasant. "Nora," he called softly, "we have visitors." She looked up from her mending, her face paling slightly as she saw the approaching men. Quickly she smoothed her apron and tucked a stray curl beneath her cap. The bishop's knock was firm and commanding. When Ezra opened the door, the 3 men filled the doorway with their dark coats and stern expressions. Bishop Lapp's eyes swept the cabin's interior, taking in the obvious signs of feminine presence, the neat curtains, the fresh swept floor, the smell of baking bread. "Brother Ezra," the bishop said, his voice grave, "we have heard, concerning things from neighbors, about the English widow staying here." Ezra stood straighter, fighting to keep his voice steady. "She needed shelter from the storm, Bishop. I could not turn her away to freeze." "That was weeks ago," one of the elders interjected. "The main roads are passable now. She should be in town, among her own kind." Nora rose from her chair, her shoulders square despite the tremor in her hands. "Respectfully, sir," she addressed the bishop directly, "I intend to repay Ezra's kindness with honest work until spring properly arrives. He saved my life that night, and I won't leave that debt unpaid." The bishop's eyebrows rose at her boldness, but something in her steady gaze seemed to give him pause. The second elder, a weathered man named Brother Yoder, studied her with thoughtful eyes. "You understand," Bishop Lapp said slowly, "that your presence here causes talk. It is not proper." "I understand your concerns," Nora replied, her voice clear and strong despite her obvious nervousness. "But I also understand that true Christian charity shouldn't bow to gossip. Ezra has been nothing but honorable, and I've worked hard to be worthy of his trust." The elders exchanged glances. Brother Yoder nodded slightly, seemingly impressed by her forthrightness. But the bishop's expression remained troubled. "The community's trust is easily broken, Brother Ezra," he warned, "and hard to rebuild. Consider carefully what you risk." After several more minutes of tense discussion, the men departed. Ezra watched through the window as their buggy and horses disappeared down the muddy lane. When he turned back to the cabin's interior, he found Nora crumpled in her chair by the stove, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her shoulders shaking. "I never meant to bring trouble to your door." Ezra crossed the room in 3 quick strides, kneeling beside her chair. "No," he said firmly. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Truth will speak louder than gossip. I believe that with all my heart." Her tear-streaked face lifted to his, vulnerable yet trusting. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen your heart these past weeks," he answered simply. "Your kindness, your hard work, your faith. God knows the truth of things, even when people misunderstand." Nora wiped her eyes with her apron. Would you pray with me?" she asked hesitantly. Ezra nodded, taking her work-roughened hand in his. Together they bowed their heads. His deep voice filled the cabin as he prayed for strength, for guidance, for protection against false judgment. Nora's quiet "Amen" joined his, and in that moment something profound passed between them, a connection deeper than words, stronger than fear. When they opened their eyes, the cabin felt different somehow, more sacred, as if their shared prayer had blessed the very air around them. Outside, water dripped steadily from the melting icicles, marking time's slow passage toward spring. Ezra helped Nora to her feet, and they moved together to tend the stove. Neither spoke of how their joined hands had lingered longer than strictly necessary, or how the morning's confrontation had bound them more tightly together instead of driving them apart. The sound of dripping water continued, steady and hopeful, like nature's own quiet prayer. But beneath that peaceful rhythm lay an unseen current of change. Soon, news would arrive from town that would shake their newfound peace to its foundations. For now, though, they worked side by side in the warming cabin, their hearts full of a faith that transcended the boundaries of both English and Amish worlds. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the melting snow when the mail driver's wagon rattled up to Ezra's cabin. His horse's hooves splashed through muddy puddles as he pulled to a stop, waving a yellow envelope. "Telegraph come through from Dodge Crossing," he called out, "for Ezra Stoltzfus." Ezra stepped out onto the porch, wiping sawdust from his hands. The driver passed him the envelope, and something in the man's expression made Ezra's stomach tighten. Inside, Nora paused in her sweeping, watching through the window as Ezra unfolded the paper with careful fingers. His face went pale as he read. This cannot be right." Nora stepped out onto the porch. "What is it?" "According to this, I signed papers selling your burned farm to the Great Western Railroad." His voice shook with disbelief. "But I would never—" Nora took the telegram with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the words again and again. "There must be some mistake. You couldn't have. We weren't even—" The mail driver cleared his throat. "Might want to get that sorted quick-like. Railroad folk don't take kindly to property disputes." After the wagon departed, Ezra hitched up his own team. The afternoon was wearing on, but they had to know the truth. Nora climbed up beside him on the wagon seat, clutching her shawl against the damp spring air. The wheels squeaked through half-frozen mud as they made their way toward town. The county clerk's office was nearly empty when they arrived, just one elderly man scratching away at ledgers in the fading light. He pulled out the deed at their request, adjusting his spectacles as he studied it. "Signatures right here," he said, pointing to the bottom of the page. "Ezra Stoltzfus, witnessed and notarized proper." Ezra leaned in close, his heart pounding. "That is not my hand, sir. Someone has forged my name." The clerk frowned, peering at him over his glasses. "Serious accusation, that. Papers all legal and proper, far as I can tell. Notarized by young Silas Stoltzfus himself." "Silas?" Ezra's voice cracked. His own cousin, who'd taken work with the railroad after his farm failed last year. "Are you certain?" "Clear as day." The clerk tapped the notary seal. "Right here with his signature." They left the office as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Already, whispers seemed to follow them down the muddy street. Faces turned away, doors closed. "Did you hear?" one woman hissed to another. "The widow and her Amish lover swindling the railroad." Nora's shoulders stiffened, but she held her head high. Ezra helped her into the wagon, his movements mechanical, his mind spinning with betrayal. The ride back to the enclave was silent except for the horses' hooves and the creak of wagon wheels. At the Amish settlement, Ezra went straight to his cousin's small house, but found it dark and empty. Neighbors said Silas had left that morning on railroad business, unusually hurried. Before they could return to Ezra's cabin, Bishop Lapp's buggy appeared. The bishop's face was grave as he stepped down. "The rumors have reached me," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Until this matter is cleared, you are suspended from worship, Ezra. We cannot have such scandal touch our community." "Bishop," Ezra protested, "I am innocent. The signature was forged." "Then prove it," the bishop interrupted. "But until you do, you must keep your distance from our gatherings." His eyes shifted to Nora. And the Englishwoman must go. After the bishop left, Ezra stood in his yard, staring at the darkening sky. The weight of accusation and isolation pressed down on him like a physical thing. Nora touched his arm gently. "Don't lose faith," she whispered. "God knows the truth, remember? You told me that yourself." Inside the cabin, they lit the lamps and stoked the fire. Neither felt much like eating. Instead, they sat in their usual places, Ezra in his carpenter's chair, Nora on her stool by the stove, and bowed their heads in silent prayer. The fire crackled softly. Smoke from the hearth drifted upward through the chimney like a fragile plea to heaven, carrying their wordless prayers into the night sky. Outside, the last patches of snow continued to melt, and somewhere in the darkness, Silas's guilty conscience carried him further and further from the truth he needed to tell. Nora watched the smoke rise, her heart aching for the good man beside her, unjustly accused. Whatever came next, she knew they would face it together, bound by something stronger than mere circumstance, a shared faith in truth's power to overcome all obstacles. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Ezra finished loading the last of their supplies into the wagon. Early spring birds called from budding branches as he secured the leather straps around boxes of dried food, tools, and Nora's carefully folded quilts. "The trails should be passable now," he said, helping Nora onto the wagon seat. 3 days to Dodge Crossing, if the weather holds. Nora settled beside him, her eyes bright with determination. "I won't let you face this alone, Ezra. Whatever lies they're spreading about us there, we'll meet them together." He nodded, grateful for her strength. The wagon wheels creaked as they pulled away from the cabin, heading west across the thawing prairie. Behind them, smoke still curled from the chimney where they'd left the banked fire to die slowly. The first day's journey was slow going. Spring rains had turned the dirt trails to mud, and twice they had to stop to help the horses through particularly deep ruts. But Nora kept their spirits up, sharing stories from her days as a trail cook while they ate bread and cheese at midday. "Land's sake, but those cowboys could eat," she chuckled, breaking off a piece of bread. 10 pounds of beans a day wasn't nearly enough. Ezra found himself smiling more than he had in weeks. Even with the weight of accusation hanging over them, Nora's quiet joy seemed to lift the burden. They made camp that night in a small grove of cottonwoods, where Ezra built a fire, while Nora prepared a simple supper of cornbread and dried beef. The second day brought clearer trails but colder weather. Gray clouds scudded overhead as they followed the creek road toward Dodge Crossing. As dusk approached, they came upon an old wooden bridge spanning a narrow ravine. "Best stop here for the night," Ezra said, pulling the horses to a halt. "There's good grass for grazing and the bridge will block the wind." But as they began to make camp, Nora froze, holding up her hand. "Listen," she whispered. "Did you hear that?" A soft whimper came from beneath the bridge. Ezra grabbed his lantern and carefully made his way down the muddy bank. In the flickering light, they found a boy of about 10 years old, huddled against the stones. His clothes were ragged, and a badly wrapped cut on his arm had begun to fester. "Don't hurt me," the boy said, shrinking back. "I ain't stole nothing from you." Nora knelt beside him, her voice gentle. "No one's going to hurt you, child. I'm Nora, and this is Ezra. What's your name?" "Tommy," he muttered, watching them warily. "Tommy Raines." "When did you last eat, Tommy?" Nora asked, already reaching for their food supplies. "Yesterday, maybe. Found some old biscuits in a barrel behind the mercantile." While Nora heated soup over the fire, Ezra cleaned and properly bandaged Tommy's arm. The boy winced but didn't cry out, though his eyes grew wide when Nora handed him a full bowl of hot soup and a thick slice of bread. "Where are your folks?" Ezra asked softly. Tommy stared into his soup. "Fever took them last month. Orphanage man came, but I ran. Been moving since then." Nora and Ezra exchanged a look over the boy's bowed head. Without words, they reached the same decision. "There's room in our wagon," Nora said. "We're headed to Dodge Crossing to sort out some trouble. After that, well, we'll figure something out." Tommy looked up sharply. "You ain't taking me to no orphanage?" "No," Ezra said firmly. "Not unless you want to go, but you need proper food and rest to heal that arm." The boy studied them both for a long moment, then nodded slowly. They spread their quilts near the fire, and Tommy fell asleep almost instantly, curled up like a small animal between them. The final day's journey to Dodge Crossing was different with Tommy aboard. He sat up front with them, pointing out hawks soaring overhead and asking Ezra endless questions about carpentry. When Nora shared her last apple, carefully cut in thirds, something in the boy's face softened. By late afternoon, the town's church steeple came into view. People stopped to stare as their wagon rolled down Main Street, the suspended Amish carpenter, the widow, and the ragged orphan boy. But Tommy sat straighter, as if daring anyone to comment, while Nora hummed quietly, her hand finding Ezra's for a brief squeeze. They might look strange to others, Ezra thought, but somehow in just 3 days, they had begun to feel like family. As they pulled up in front of the hotel, he saw Tommy helping Nora down from the wagon with surprising gentleness, and his heart swelled with unexpected warmth. "Right then," Nora said, brushing dust from her skirts. "Let's find ourselves a room and get Tommy properly fed. Tomorrow's soon enough to start asking questions about that deed." The morning sun cast long shadows down Dodge Crossing's dusty main street as Ezra guided their wagon past the general store. Tommy sat between them, his newly bandaged arm cradled close. Shop owners paused their sweeping to stare, and a cluster of women outside the millinery huddled closer, whispering behind gloved hands. "Would you look at the size of her?" one woman said loudly enough to carry. "Poor man's wagon must be near breaking." Nora's cheeks flushed red, but she kept her eyes forward, though her hands twisted in her lap. Ezra noticed and spoke softly. "Their words show their hearts, not yours." They passed the Golden Spur Saloon, where rough-looking men lounged on the porch. One spat tobacco juice and called out, "Hey there, preacher's eunuch. Finally found yourself a woman?" Nora half rose from her seat, but Ezra touched her arm gently. "Peace, Nora. Dignity outlasts mockery." She settled back, though her voice shook with anger. "How dare they speak to you that way? You're worth 10 of any of them." "Their words can't touch what's true," Ezra said quietly. Tommy watched this exchange with sharp eyes, learning something about strength that had nothing to do with fists. Behind the livery stable, they found a small bunkhouse for rent. The stablemaster's wife, Mrs. Peterson, showed them inside. It was humble: 2 narrow beds, a washstand, and a pot-bellied stove, but clean. "It ain't much," Mrs. Peterson said, "but it's private. Most folks won't bother you back here." "It's perfect," Nora said firmly, already unpacking their meager supplies. She spread one of her quilts over the narrower bed. "Tommy, this one's yours." The boy's eyes widened. He'd clearly expected to sleep on the floor. Early the next morning, they made their way to the county clerk's office. The space smelled of dust and old paper, with morning light streaming through grimy windows. Deputy Samuel Holt sat at his desk, nervously adjusting his collar as they approached. "The deed." He shuffled through papers. "Yes, we have a copy here, provided by Mr. Jenkins from the railroad office." He paused, glancing around before lowering his voice. "But something's not right. The original's gone missing from our files." Ezra leaned forward. "Missing? When was it last seen?" "Can't rightly say." The deputy wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "But I remember seeing a man in plain dress, like yourself, speaking with Jenkins last month. Thought it odd at the time." Nora and Ezra exchanged worried looks. Someone from the church community involved in the fraud. The thought settled like a stone in Ezra's stomach. "I need to return to the bishop with proof," Ezra said as they left the office. "But first we must find that original deed." They spent the afternoon questioning shopkeepers and stable hands, but people turned away, suddenly busy with sweeping or sorting goods. Tommy proved unexpectedly helpful, his small size allowing him to listen unnoticed as he pretended to play marbles near gossiping groups. That evening, As they sat in their bunkhouse sharing a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Nora reached across the table and squeezed Ezra's hand. "We'll find the truth," she said firmly. "God didn't bring us this far to abandon us now." Tommy watched them with solemn eyes. "Those folks in town," he said suddenly. "They're wrong about you both. You're good people." Nora's eyes misted as she smiled at the boy. "Thank you, Tommy. Sometimes the Lord's greatest gifts come in unexpected packages, like finding a brave young man under a bridge." Ezra nodded, looking at their small group gathered around the rough table. Here was truth that no forged deed could touch. 3 lonely souls forming something like family, despite the world's scorn. Whatever price the truth might demand, he would pay it gladly to protect this precious gift. Outside their window, the sun set over Dodge Crossing's scattered buildings, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now they had shelter, food, and each other. Sometimes, Ezra reflected, that was miracle enough. As evening settled over Dodge Crossing, Tommy's cheeks grew flushed with fever. He tossed restlessly on the narrow bunkhouse bed, his previously bandaged arm hot to the touch. "He's burning up," Nora said, pressing a cool cloth to the boy's forehead. She dipped another rag in their water bucket and wrapped it around his wrists, the way her mother had taught her years ago. Ezra paced the small room, his footsteps creaking on the wooden floorboards. "Should I fetch the doctor?" "We'll try bringing the fever down first," Nora said softly. "Sometimes the body needs to fight on its own." She settled into the chair beside Tommy's bed, smoothing his damp hair back from his forehead. Almost without thinking, she began to hum the same hymn she'd sung that first night in Ezra's cabin. "Be Thou My Vision." The gentle melody filled the dim room as evening deepened into night. Hour after hour, she tended the boy. When his fever spiked near midnight, she sang the hymn again, her rich voice steady and soothing. Tommy's restless movements gradually calmed at the sound. Ezra sat in the room's other chair, watching Nora's gentle ministrations. The lamplight caught the silver threads in her dark hair, the worried crease between her brows, the tender way she adjusted Tommy's blanket. Something shifted in his heart as he witnessed her unwavering care for this orphaned child. The feeling that had been growing these past weeks crystallized into certainty. He loved her, completely, and without reservation. Near dawn, Tommy's fever finally broke. His breathing eased, and color returned to his face. Nora sagged in relief, exhausted from her night-long vigil. "Rest now," Ezra said softly, touching her shoulder. "I'll watch him." She nodded gratefully and curled up on the other bed, still fully dressed. Within moments, she was asleep. The morning sun was barely touching the horizon when heavy boots sounded on the bunkhouse steps. A sharp knock followed. Ezra opened the door to find Jenkins, the railroad foreman, standing there in his dust-covered suit. "Mr. Stoltzfus," Jenkins said, not bothering to remove his hat. "Thought you ought to know that land's gone, plain and legal. Deed's been filed and recorded. Best pack up your woman and clear out." Ezra held his ground in the doorway, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Nora and Tommy. "The deed was forged, Mr. Jenkins. We mean to prove it." "Proof takes time," Jenkins smirked. "Railroad don't wait for proof." He turned to leave, but paused, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "Since you're so interested in legal matters, might want to read the homestead laws. Not that it'll help you none." Ezra took the document, watching Jenkins stride away through the morning mist. Inside, he unfolded the paper and began to read. His eyes widened as he discovered a crucial clause. Any homesteader who occupied and improved their claim by spring planting could maintain their rights to the land, regardless of competing claims. Nora stirred and sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Who was that at the door?" "The railroad foreman," Ezra replied, still studying the document. "Nora, look at this. There might be a way to save your land." She joined him, reading over his shoulder as he explained about the improvement clause. "If we rebuild before spring," he began. "Rebuild?" Nora's voice wavered. "Ezra, the scandal's already bad enough. If we work together on my land, the truth is already our shelter," he said quietly. "What matters more, what people say, or what God leads us to do?" Tommy sat up in bed, his fever gone, but his eyes still bright. "I can help build too," he offered. "I'm stronger than I look." Nora looked between them, this gentle carpenter and brave orphan boy who had become her unlikely family. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled. "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes, we'll rebuild it together." Within an hour, they had packed their wagon and settled their bill with Mrs. Peterson. The morning sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold as they rolled east toward Nora's burned homestead. Tommy sat between them on the wagon seat, while their few possessions and Ezra's tools rattled behind them. "It won't be easy," Nora said softly, watching the prairie grass wave in the morning breeze. "Nothing worth doing ever is," Ezra replied, his hands steady on the reins. As they crested a small rise, the spring sunshine warmed their faces. Ahead lay challenge and hard work, but also hope as vast as the Kansas sky above them. They rode on together, their hearts lifted by shared purpose and the promise of a new beginning. Spring rains drummed steadily on their temporary canvas shelter as Ezra and Tommy wrestled another heavy log into position. The foundation of Nora's new cabin was taking shape, though slowly. Each timber had to be carefully stripped, shaped, and fitted by hand. "Mind those notches, Tommy," Ezra instructed, demonstrating how to use the adze. "Steady strokes, let the tool do the work." The 10-year-old boy's face scrunched in concentration as he mimicked Ezra's movements. His smaller hands weren't as strong, but his determination made up for it. "Like this?" "That's right." Ezra smiled, watching Tommy's careful progress. "You've got a carpenter's eye, seeing how the pieces should fit." Near their work site, Nora tended to her makeshift garden. Dozens of clay pots and wooden boxes she'd salvaged from town, now sprouting with tender green shoots. She'd planted everything they'd need: beans, corn, squash, and herbs for both cooking and medicine. "Supper's nearly ready," she called, stirring a pot of stew hanging over their campfire. The aroma of wild onions and rabbit meat drifted across the clearing. Their days fell into a gentle rhythm. Dawn found them rising to milk their cow and tend the animals. Mornings were for heavy work, hauling logs, cutting joints, raising walls. Afternoons brought lessons as Ezra taught Tommy the finer points of woodworking, while Nora showed him how to read from her mother's old Bible. The spring rains often interrupted their progress, forcing them to huddle under their canvas shelter. During these pauses, Nora would mend clothes or work on a new quilt, while Ezra sketched designs for the cabin's furniture. Tommy usually sprawled nearby, whittling small animals from scraps of wood. "This rain's a blessing," Nora would say, watching her seedlings drink in the moisture. "The Lord provides what we need, when we need it." One clear evening, after a long day of work, they sat together on logs near the campfire. The first stars were appearing overhead, twinkling like distant lanterns. Tommy had already fallen asleep in their wagon, worn out from hauling water all afternoon. Ezra cleared his throat softly. "Nora?" She looked up from her mending, the firelight catching the gentle curves of her face. Yes? I've been thinking. He paused, gathering his courage. About us. About what we're building here. Nora set aside her sewing, her hands folding quietly in her lap. So have I. Would you? Ezra's voice wavered slightly. Would you pray with me? About our future? She nodded, tears gleaming in her eyes. They knelt together in the soft grass, their shoulders barely touching as they bowed their heads. Lord, Ezra began, his voice rough with emotion, if it be your will, if this love you've planted in our hearts is righteous. Guide us, Nora whispered, her fingers finding his in the darkness. Show us your path. When they finished praying, Ezra turned to face her. I want to court you proper, Nora, pure and honest until Easter. Then, if you're willing— Yes, she breathed, squeezing his hand. I am willing. The next morning, old Mrs. Whitaker rode by on her way to market. She reined her horse to a stop, eyeing their progress with obvious curiosity. Building up right nice, she commented, noting the half-finished walls and neat garden. Heard tell you're planning a chapel wedding come Easter. If the Lord wills it, Nora replied simply, standing straight despite the older woman's scrutiny. Mrs. Whitaker nodded slowly, her expression softening. Well now, ain't that proper? A body can't fault folks for doing things decent and in order. She clicked to her horse, adding over her shoulder, Might be my Henry could lend a hand with that roof raising when you get there. As she rode away, Nora and Ezra exchanged surprised glances. It was the first friendly offer they'd received from any neighbor. By sundown, 3 more families had stopped by, each offering some small help, a basket of fresh eggs, the loan of a plow horse, promises to attend their wedding. The cruel whispers that had followed them from town seemed to be turning, like leaves in a fresh wind. That night, as Tommy slept in the wagon and the crickets sang their evening chorus, Ezra and Nora sat by their fire once more. Their shoulders touched, but their hands stayed chastely apart, a small sacrifice to honor their courtship pledge. Reckon people can see truth if you give them time, Nora mused, watching the sparks drift upward. Truth and love, Ezra agreed quietly. God's greatest gifts. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient paths, witnesses to another day of building, not just a cabin, but a family, founded on faith and fashioned by grace. 3 weeks of steady progress had transformed their homestead. The cabin's walls stood proud and strong, waiting only for the roof beams to complete their shelter. Ezra wiped sweat from his brow, admiring how the afternoon sun caught the fresh-cut timber. Tommy had already stacked smaller logs for the porch, while Nora's garden flourished with knee-high corn and climbing beans. We need more water for the mortar, Nora called, setting down her empty bucket. Tommy, would you help me fetch some from the creek? The boy jumped up eagerly. Race you there! He took off running, his bare feet kicking up dust. Nora laughed, following at a slower pace. No racing with full buckets on the way back. Ezra watched them disappear down the path, his heart full. He turned back to measuring the final roof beam, but a flicker of movement caught his eye. 3 riders approached from the west, keeping to the shadows of the tree line. Before he could shout a warning, they burst into the clearing. 2 men carried blazing torches, while the third held a pistol. Railroad sends its regards, the armed man sneered, wheeling his horse. The others hurled their torches onto the cabin's fresh-laid shingles. Dry wood caught instantly. Flames raced across the roof as Ezra lunged for the water barrel, but the armed rider fired a warning shot. Stand back, Amish. This land ain't yours no more. Horror and rage boiled in Ezra's chest as he watched their weeks of work transform into an inferno. Smoke billowed black against the blue sky, and the heat drove him backward. Then he heard screaming. Tommy and Nora had returned, the boy rushing forward with his bucket. "No, our home!" "Tommy, wait!" Nora cried. But the boy was already too close. With a thunderous crack, a burning beam collapsed, striking Tommy's shoulder and sending him sprawling. His scream of pain cut through the roar of flames. The riders wheeled away, laughing as they spurred their horses toward the ridge. Ezra's hands shook as he helped Nora drag Tommy to safety. The boy's shirt was scorched, his shoulder badly bruised, but he was alive. Something dark and terrible rose in Ezra's heart as he watched their dreams burn. Without a word, he strode to the wagon and pulled out his father's old rifle. He checked the loads with trembling fingers. "Ezra, no!" Nora called after him, but he was already running, tracking the rider's dust trail toward the ridge. Rage pumped through his veins with each stride. The rifle felt heavy in his hands, a weight his peaceful upbringing had never prepared him to carry. But those men had hurt Tommy, had destroyed their home, had mocked God's own laws of justice. He caught up to them near the ridge top. The riders had dismounted to water their horses, confident no one would follow. Ezra raised the rifle, his finger finding the trigger. One shot would change everything, would make them pay. "Ezra." Nora's voice, soft but firm, came from behind him. He hadn't heard her approach. "If you fight for land with hate," she said, "you'll lose your soul, and me." The rifle trembled in his grip. Tears blurred his vision as her words pierced the fog of his rage. "They hurt Tommy," he whispered hoarsely. "They burned everything we built. And we'll build again." Nora stepped closer, her hand gentle on his arm. "With love, not vengeance, that's what makes a true home." The rifle lowered slowly, then dropped from his nerveless fingers. Ezra fell to his knees, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Nora knelt beside him, drawing him close as the riders disappeared over the ridge. "I wanted to kill them," he confessed, horror at his own darkness mixing with shame. "But you didn't," Nora stroked his hair. "You chose love. That's what matters." Together they walked back to where Tommy waited, cradling his injured arm. The cabin was now just a smoking skeleton against the darkening sky. They gathered what little remained, some tools, Nora's Bible, Tommy's wooden carvings that had been in the wagon. As the moon rose, they sat together watching the last embers die. Tommy dozed between them, his head resting on Nora's lap while she hummed softly. The night air carried the scent of ash and pine. "What do we do now?" Tommy asked sleepily. Ezra looked at Nora, finding strength in her steady gaze. "We pray," he said. "Then we rebuild. Not with anger, but with faith." Nora reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "And this time," she added, "we'll have help. The neighbors will come when they hear what happened. Love builds stronger walls than hate ever could." Under the vast prairie sky, they held each other close, 3 hearts beating as one family. The cabin lay in ashes, but their bond, forged in fire and tempered by mercy, stood unshaken. Dawn crept over the scorched homestead, painting the blackened timbers in pale gold. Tommy lay, wrapped in quilts beneath the wagon canopy, his injured shoulder wrapped in strips torn from Nora's petticoat. The boy's face was drawn with pain, but his spirit remained unbroken. "Reckon I can help sort nails today," he offered, trying to sit up. Nora gently pressed him back down. "You'll help most by healing proper, young man." She tucked the blanket around him, her touch motherly and sure. "Besides, we need our master carpenter back at full strength." Ezra looked up from where he knelt in the ashes, salvaging what tools had survived the blaze. The morning sun caught Nora's face as she tended Tommy, and his heart swelled with a love that felt both fierce and tender. They had lost nearly everything, yet somehow gained what mattered most. The clip-clop of hooves drew their attention. A mail rider approached, his saddlebags heavy with letters. "Got something here for Ezra Stoltzfus," he called, pulling a wrinkled envelope from his bag. Ezra wiped his sooty hands on his trousers before accepting the letter. His eyes widened as he recognized the hasty scrawl. "It's from Silas." Nora moved closer, steadying herself against his arm as he unfolded the paper. Tommy watched from his makeshift bed, tension visible in his good shoulder. The letter was brief, the ink blotched as if written in great haste. "Cousin Ezra, I cannot bear the weight of silence any longer. I had a hand in the deed's forgery, though others pressed me to it. By the time you read this, I will have fled west. May God forgive what I cannot undo." "Coward," Tommy muttered, but there was more sadness than anger in his voice. Ezra's hands trembled as he folded the letter. "At least now we have proof of foul play." He turned to Nora, determination hardening his gentle features. "I must write to Bishop Lapp. With Silas's confession, perhaps he'll support us at the hearing." Nora nodded, hope flickering in her eyes. Truth has a way of coming to light, like sunrise after the darkest night. Using a charred board as a writing surface, Ezra composed his message to the bishop. He wrote of Silas's confession, of the arson attack, of Tommy's injury. But most importantly, he wrote of his own heart's transformation, how love had taught him that God's law lived in mercy as much as in rules. The mail rider promised to deliver it personally, touched by their plight. As his horse disappeared over the rise, an unexpected sound drew their attention, wagon wheels approaching from the east. 3 farm wagons crested the hill, loaded with lumber and supplies. Neighbors they barely knew, both English and Amish, had come to help. Martha Weber, whose husband had once mocked Ezra's gentle ways, climbed down with a basket of fresh bread and preserves. "Heard about the fire," she said simply. "Ain't right what those railroad men did." Tears welled in Nora's eyes as more wagons arrived. Women brought food and blankets, while men unloaded boards and tools. Even those who had whispered against them now offered hands in friendship. By sunset, a small shelter stood where ashes had been, just big enough for the 3 of them, and proof of their claim to the land. The neighbors worked without ceremony, sharing water and bread as if they'd always been family. 3 days later, another rider arrived with the bishop's response. Ezra read it aloud to Nora and Tommy in their humble new home. "The Lord tests our hearts through fire, that we might know what truly endures. I will attend the hearing in Dodge Crossing to speak truth as I have witnessed it. Let us pray that justice and mercy shall meet in wisdom." Nora's fingers found Ezra's as they sat in the lantern light. Outside, crickets sang their evening hymns, and cool air carried the scent of wild sage. Tommy had fallen asleep, his injured arm healing clean and straight. "We'll face whatever comes together," Nora whispered, her faith steady as a cornerstone. Ezra nodded, drawing strength from her presence. "Together," he echoed, "with God's help and honest hearts." The small shelter might have seemed humble to passing strangers, but to them it held everything precious: hope, healing, and the promise of tomorrow's mercy. Among the ashes of what was lost, something far more valuable had taken root: a love that could weather any storm, and a faith tested and proven in fire's fierce crucible. Early April painted the prairie with tender green shoots as 2 wagons rolled toward Dodge Crossing. The morning sun warmed their backs, but anxiety churned in their stomachs. Ezra guided the lead wagon, with Nora beside him, and Tommy nestled among blankets in the back. Bishop Lapp followed in his own cart, his gray beard catching the breeze. The courthouse loomed before them, its wooden steps already crowded with townsfolk and railroad men in dark suits. Nora's hand found Ezra's as they climbed down from the wagon. Tommy insisted on walking despite his healing shoulder, determined to stand tall beside them. "The Lord goes before us," Bishop Lapp reminded them quietly as they mounted the courthouse steps. His presence, stern yet supportive, gave them courage. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The judge, a weathered man with silver hair, called the session to order. His gavel crack echoed through the packed room. The railroad's lawyer rose first, his suit crisp and his voice smooth as oil. "Your Honor, these people conspired to forge documents and claim land rightfully purchased by the Great Western Railroad. We have witnesses who will testify to Mr. Stoltzfus's signature on the deed." Ezra sat straight-backed in his chair, his face calm despite the accusations. Nora watched him with pride, seeing how faith had replaced fear in his eyes. Even when the lawyer produced the contested deed, Ezra's voice remained steady as he denied signing it. The morning wore on. Witness after witness took the stand. Mostly railroad men in identical dark suits. Their testimony felt rehearsed. Too perfect. The judge's expression grew increasingly troubled as he studied the documents before him. Tommy fidgeted beside Nora, his good hand clutching something inside his jacket. Just as the railroad lawyer began his closing arguments, the boy suddenly stood up. "Your Honor," Tommy's voice cracked with emotion, "I got something you need to see." The judge peered down at him over his spectacles. "Young man, this is a court of law." "Please, sir." Tommy limped forward, pulling out a sealed envelope. "I found this in Silas Stoltzfus's old saddlebag when we was cleaning the barn. He left it behind when he run off." The courthouse fell silent. The judge motioned for the bailiff to bring him the envelope. He broke the seal carefully, unfolding the papers inside. His eyebrows rose as he read. "This appears to be a full confession," the judge announced, "from one Silas Stoltzfus." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The railroad lawyer jumped to his feet, but the judge silenced him with a stern look. "In this document, Mr. Silas Stoltzfus admits to forging his cousin Ezra's signature under direct pressure from railroad agents. He names names and provides dates." The judge's voice grew harder with each word. He details how he was threatened with financial ruin if he refused to participate in this scheme. The railroad men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their lawyer's face had gone pale. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "he expresses deep remorse for betraying his cousin's trust and fleeing rather than facing the consequences of his actions." Nora reached for Ezra's hand, tears of relief filling her eyes. Bishop Lapp nodded slowly, as if seeing God's hand at work in this moment of truth. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "This sale is hereby voided due to proven fraud. The land returns to its rightful owner, Mrs. Nora Brenner. Additionally, the Great Western Railroad will pay damages for the recent arson of the partially constructed homestead." The courtroom erupted in murmurs and movement. The railroad men hurried out, their lawyer gathering papers with trembling hands. But Ezra barely noticed them. He was looking at Tommy, who stood straighter now despite his injury. "You saved us, boy," Ezra said softly. Tommy shrugged his good shoulder, trying to hide his smile. "Reckon God just needed someone small enough to find that envelope." Bishop Lapp stepped forward, placing one hand on Ezra's shoulder and one on Nora's. "The Lord's truth will out," he said, his stern face softening, "even when it takes its own sweet time in coming." They emerged from the courthouse into bright spring sunshine. The townsfolk who had come to watch now approached with congratulations and handshakes. Several Amish families who had traveled for the hearing offered prayers of thanksgiving. Nora stood in the middle of it all, her heart too full for words. She watched Ezra lift Tommy carefully into their wagon, saw the way the boy's face glowed with belonging. Bishop Lapp spoke quietly with several elders, no doubt sharing his witness of how faith and patience had revealed God's plan. The truth had finally come to light, just as the spring sun had melted winter's shadows. Their victory felt both hard-won and divinely granted, a testament to standing firm in faith when all seemed lost. Spring painted the prairie in tender colors, as if God himself had taken a brush to heal winter's wounds. Purple wildflowers pushed through the ashes where Nora's first homestead had burned, their delicate petals dancing in the morning breeze. The community had gathered early, setting up wooden benches beneath the vast Kansas sky. Ezra stood beneath a hand-carved wooden cross, his plain black suit crisp in the morning light. Tommy fidgeted beside him, proudly holding the Bible that Ezra had worked on late into the nights, its cover lovingly carved with E and N, surrounded by intricate vines. The boy's injury had healed well, leaving only a slight stiffness that the doctor said would fade with time. The Amish elders sat in the front row, their stern faces now softened with approval. Bishop Lapp had visited often during the rebuilding, watching as the new cabin took shape through community effort. Each beam and board represented not just shelter, but redemption. When Nora appeared, walking between rows of spring flowers, Ezra's breath caught in his throat. Her dress was simple blue cotton, but her face glowed with such joy it seemed to light the whole gathering. She moved with grace that belied her size, carrying herself with the dignity of a woman who had finally found her true home. The bishop's deep voice carried across the assembled guests as he spoke of faith, tested by fire, and love proven through trials. He praised their patience, their restraint in the face of injustice, and their dedication to truth. When he raised his hands to bless their union, several of the elders who had once questioned their relationship nodded in solemn approval. As Ezra and Nora exchanged their vows, she leaned close and whispered, "I feel seen by heaven today." Tears glistened in Ezra's eyes as he squeezed her hands in response. After the ceremony, everyone gathered beneath a spreading cottonwood tree. The women had prepared a feast. Steaming pots of hearty stew and loaves of fresh-baked bread filled the air with mouth-watering aromas. Children played tag between the benches, while their elders shared stories and laughter. The land that had once been a source of such bitter conflict now hosted a celebration of new beginnings. Where ashes had been, flowers bloomed. Where suspicion had dwelt, trust flourished. The gentle spring breeze carried the sound of bells across the prairie, announcing to all that Grace had finally come home to roost. Evening settled over the prairie like a soft blanket, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold. The new cabin stood proud against the deepening twilight, its windows glowing with warm lamplight that spilled across the freshly built porch. Inside, the wooden floors still carried the sweet scent of fresh-cut pine, mingling with the aromas of supper and home. Tommy had curled up by the hearth after helping with the evening chores, his small form wrapped in one of Nora's quilts. The firelight played across his peaceful face, making him look younger than his 10 years. The day's celebrations had worn him out, but contentment showed in his gentle breathing and relaxed features. In the main room, Ezra sat in his favorite chair, his skilled hands moving steadily as he worked on a cradle. The wood shavings fell softly around his feet as he carved, each stroke deliberate and loving. The piece was taking shape slowly, a testament to their hopes for the future, their prayers for the child they might one day be blessed with. The lamplight caught the grain of the wood, revealing patterns that seemed to dance beneath his touch. Nora moved about the kitchen area, humming softly as she set out their wedding supper. Her blue dress rustled as she worked, and her eyes sparkled with joy and mischief. The simple meal she prepared filled the cabin with homey scents: fresh bread, steamed vegetables, and the last of the wedding stew. Looking up from her work, she caught Ezra watching her. A teasing smile played across her face as she approached him. "Do my curves still make you crazy, husband?" she asked softly, careful not to wake Tommy. Ezra set aside his carving tools and took her hand in his. His eyes were full of tenderness as he pressed a gentle kiss to her fingers. "They make me grateful," he answered, his voice rich with emotion, "because they remind me God made beauty out of what the world called broken." Through the open window, the evening breeze carried the sweet perfume of prairie lilacs and the earthy scent of wood smoke. The wind whispered through the new curtains Nora had sewn, speaking of promise and possibility. Their future stretched before them like the endless Kansas horizon, not a future built on physical strength or worldly power, but one founded on mercy, sustained by love, and blessed by faith. The last rays of sunset painted their humble cabin in hues of rose and amber, blessing this new family with its gentle light. They had found their peace at last, not in spite of their trials, but because of them. Each challenge had brought them closer, each hardship had proven their worth, and now they could face tomorrow together, stronger for having weathered yesterday's storms. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.